The future King of England stepped out of the royal box, walked past the security cordon, and made his way toward the players' tunnel. The cameras followed every step. The crowd fell silent. And when he emerged moments later, he was holding something that would make Wimbledon history. Prince William had watched Alex Eala's historic run from the royal box. He had seen her dismantle opponents, break records, and capture the hearts of millions. He had witnessed the sea of Filipino flags and the deafening roar of a nation finding its voice on the world's biggest stage. And he had decided that this was a moment that deserved recognition. Not with a handshake, not with a photograph, but with something far more personal. When the Prince of Wales made his way to the players' lounge, he carried with him an offer that would leave the Filipina sensation absolutely speechless. An offer to acquire her Wimbledon racket. The very racket that had just carried her into the third round of the most prestigious tournament in tennis. For the royal collection, a place among the artifacts of the sport's greatest legends. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. This wasn't just about the racket. It was about what the racket represented. A 21-year-old from a country with no tennis history who had just become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. A young woman who had carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders. And a future king who recognized that history was being written before his very eyes. Was this the ultimate recognition of Alex Eala's historic run, or just the beginning of something even more extraordinary? The roar from Court 3 was unlike anything the All England club had ever heard. A sea of red, white, and blue stretched across the stands. Thousands of Filipino flags waved in unison. The chants in Tagalog echoed across the grounds, turning the most prestigious tournament in tennis into a celebration of national pride. And at the center of it all stood Alex Eala, a 21-year-old from Quezon City who was about to do something no Filipino had ever done before. It was July 2, 2026, the second round of Wimbledon. Standing across the net was Maya Joint, the 20-year-old Australian, who had just days earlier stunned the tennis world by defeating 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams on center court. Joint had also broken Eala's heart exactly 1 year earlier in the Eastbourne final, saving 4 championship points to steal the title in a dramatic 3-set thriller. The Australian had come out firing, taking the first set 6-3 with her blistering ball striking. At 37 winners in all, she looked unstoppable. But this was a different Eala. A player who had grown, matured, and learned from her mistakes. A player who had won a WTA 125 title on grass in Birmingham. A player who had stunned world number 2 Elena Rybakina and No. 8 Elina Svitolina in Berlin. A player who had arrived at Wimbledon as the number 29 seed. The first Filipino in tennis history to earn a Grand Slam seed. Eala refused to break. She dug deep, adjusted her game, and unleashed a level of dominance that left the Australian reeling. She reeled off the final 9 games of the match. The second set went 6-2. The third was a stunning 6-0 shutout. The final score, 3-6, 6-2, 6-2. When the final point landed, the stadium erupted. Filipino flags waved frantically. Tears flowed. Hugs were shared. History had been made. Alex Eala had become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. She was the only player from the Philippines to advance this far in any Grand Slam tournament since 1968. It's obviously an amazing thing for me to do that for my country, Eala said. I really appreciate that I'm able to share this with the nation. But I think first and foremost it makes me super proud because of the work that I've put in. Etched on the back of her sun visor was a phrase in Tagalog that roughly translates as, "Once it grows, it cannot be stopped." But as the celebrations continued, something else was happening in the royal box. Someone had been watching Eala's historic run closely. Someone whose attention would elevate this moment from historic to truly unforgettable. The royal box at Wimbledon is one of the most exclusive spaces in all of sports. A set of 74 dark green wicker chairs on the south side of center court. It has been reserved for royalty, heads of state, and the sport's greatest legends since 1922. Attendance is by invitation only, and guests are expected to dress in smart attire. Over the years, it has hosted everyone from Queen Elizabeth II to Hollywood royalty like Samuel L. Jackson and Drake. And on July 2, 2026, it hosted the future King of England. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, had taken his seat in the royal box earlier in the day, alongside other dignitaries and celebrities who had flocked to the All England Club for the 4th day of the championships. His wife, Catherine, the Princess of Wales and patron of the All England Club, had broken tradition earlier that morning, stepping away from the royal box to greet fans in the famous Wimbledon queue, pose for selfies, and even help hand out tickets. But William had remained in the box watching the matches unfold from the most privileged vantage point in tennis. He had seen the drama, the upsets, the moments of brilliance. But it was the young Filipina on Court 3 who had captured his attention. The sea of red, white, and blue had been impossible to ignore. The deafening roar of the Filipino crowd had echoed across the grounds, turning the hallowed lawns of SW19 into a celebration of national pride. The energy, the passion, the love of a nation for their hero. It was unlike anything Wimbledon had ever seen. And at the center of it all was a 21-year-old from Quezon City who had just done the impossible. Eala's historic victory was not just a sporting achievement, it was a cultural moment. A nation of 115 million people had found a hero. A country with no history of Grand Slam success had produced a player who could compete with the best in the world. And a future king had taken notice. The tradition of royalty at Wimbledon stretches back decades. The Duke of Kent has been president of the All England Club since 1969. Princess Kate became a patron in 2022. Up until 2003, players were expected to bow or curtsy to members of the royal family when entering or leaving center court. But on this day, it was Prince William who would make a gesture that would leave the tennis world speechless. A gesture that went far beyond the traditions of the royal box. As Eala walked off court 3, still buzzing from her historic victory, a message arrived. A royal aide approached her team with a request. The Prince of Wales would like to meet the history maker. Eala, still processing the magnitude of her achievement, was led toward the players' lounge. She had no idea what was about to happen. No one did. The Players' Lounge at the All England Club is a sanctuary of quiet efficiency. It is where champions decompress, where dreams are processed, and where the weight of history is carried in silence. But on July 2, 2026, it became the stage for a moment that would leave the tennis world absolutely stunned. Prince William walked through the doors with a casual elegance that belied his status. He was dressed in a navy suit, the same outfit he had worn in the royal box. His presence was commanding, but his demeanor was warm. He had come not as a prince, but as a fan, a witness to history. A man who recognized greatness when he saw it. Eala stood to greet him, her eyes wide with surprise. She had been told she would meet a royal, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The prince spoke of her historic run, of the Filipino fans who had turned the All England Club into a home away from home, of the significance of her achievement for her country. And then, he made an offer that left the 21-year-old absolutely speechless. He wanted to acquire her Wimbledon racket, not as a personal trophy, not for himself, but for the royal collection. The same prestigious archive that houses artifacts from the sport's greatest legends. A place among the greats. A recognition that her place in history was secure. The room fell silent. Eala's team exchanged glances. The magnitude of the gesture was staggering. The royal collection is not something that is offered lightly. It is reserved for moments that transcend sport, for achievements that become part of history, for athletes who have done something truly extraordinary. Eala had done exactly that. She had become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the third round of a Grand Slam. She had carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders and delivered. She had proven that greatness doesn't have a passport. And now, the future King of England was asking to preserve her legacy in the royal collection. The offer wasn't just about the racket. It was about what the racket represented. A 21-year-old from a country with no tennis history. A young woman who had captured the hearts of millions. A champion whose journey had inspired a nation. Eala's response would be the most important moment of her life. But for now, all she could do was stand in stunned silence. The silence in the players' lounge was deafening. For a long moment, Alex Eala simply stood there, processing the magnitude of what she had just been offered. The future King of England wanted her racket, not as a souvenir, not as a personal memento, but for the royal collection, a place among the legends of the sport. Her mind raced. Just weeks ago, she had been preparing for Wimbledon, hoping to make it past the first round for the first time in her career. She had dreamed of making history, of becoming the first Filipino to win a match at the All England Club. She had achieved that and so much more. And now, this. "I'm honored," she finally said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never imagined that my racket would one day be part of something like this. It means more to me than I can say." Prince William smiled warmly. He understood the weight of the moment. He had seen the passion of the Filipino fans, the sea of red, white, and blue, that had transformed Court 3 into a celebration of national pride. He had witnessed the history being made on the grass courts of SW19, and he had recognized that this young woman from Quezon City had done something truly extraordinary. The prince spoke of how her journey had captured the imagination of the tennis world. Of how her story, a young woman from a country with no tennis history, rising to become a Grand Slam seed, was the kind of narrative that inspired generations. He expressed his admiration for her composure, her grace, and her unwavering commitment to representing her country with pride. Eala listened, still processing the surreal nature of the moment. She had met royalty before. She had posed for a selfie with Novak Djokovic at the Laureus World Sports Awards. But this was different. This was personal. This was a recognition that went far beyond the tennis court. Offer was not just about the racket. It was about validation. A statement from the highest levels of British society that Alex Eala's achievement was worthy of being preserved for generations to come. The royal collection would now include a piece of Philippine tennis history, a symbol of a 21-year-old's dream that had become a reality. As the prince prepared to leave, he offered one final word of encouragement. "Keep making history," he said. "The world is watching." Eala nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had made history on the court. Now, she had made it off the court as well. And the recognition from the future King of England had elevated her achievement to something truly unforgettable. The doors of the players' lounge closed behind the Prince of Wales. The cameras had captured the moment. The journalists had filed their stories. But the significance of what had just happened would resonate far beyond the walls of the All England Club. Alex Eala stood alone in the quiet of the lounge, still processing the surreal nature of the past few minutes. A few weeks ago, she had been preparing for Wimbledon, hoping to win her first match at the All England Club. She had dreamed of making history, of becoming the first Filipino to reach the third round of a Grand Slam in the Open era. She had achieved that and so much more. And now, the future King of England had personally asked for her racket to be preserved in the royal collection alongside the artifacts of the sport's greatest legends. The weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. Eala had represented the Philippines with pride throughout her historic run. Etched on the back of her sun visor was a phrase in Tagalog that roughly translates as, "Once it grows, it cannot be stopped." Those words had proved prophetic. From a 12-year-old girl training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain to a 21-year-old making history on the grass of Wimbledon, her journey had been one of relentless growth and unwavering determination. And now, that journey had been recognized by royalty. The Royal Collection at Wimbledon is one of the most prestigious archives in all of sports. It houses artifacts from the greatest champions in tennis history, rackets, trophies, and memorabilia that tell the story of the sport's evolution. It is a place where legends are preserved for future generations. And now it would include a piece of Philippine tennis history. Eala's racket would take its place alongside the artifacts of the sport's greatest champions. A 21-year-old from Quezon City, standing alongside the legends she had grown up watching. It was a recognition that extended far beyond the tennis court. It was a validation of her journey. A statement that her achievement was worthy of being remembered for generations. But the significance of this moment extended far beyond the racket itself. It was about what Eala represented. A young woman from a country with no history of Grand Slam success, who had climbed to the top of her sport through sheer determination and grit. A woman who had never forgotten where she came from. A woman who had reminded the world that sports are about more than trophies and prize money. Earlier in the tournament, Eala had spoken about the significance of representing her country. "I think it's so sentimental to be able to wear things or to carry parts of my culture with me on court," she had said. "Because of course it's a huge reason as to who I am. And for me to be able to represent the Philippines in Wimbledon, I guess, and in the biggest stages in the world, it means so much to me." Now, that representation had been recognized by royalty. The future King of England had seen what the world was beginning to understand. Alex Eala was more than a tennis player. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of dreams. A reminder that greatness doesn't have a passport. As Eala prepared for her third-round clash with defending champion Iga Swiatek, she carried with her more than just a tennis racket. She carried the weight of a nation. The pride of a people who had waited generations for a moment like this. The knowledge that her journey had already inspired millions. And the recognition that her legacy was secure, forever preserved in the royal collection of the most prestigious tournament in tennis. The racket would be preserved in the royal collection. But the legacy of Alex Eala's Wimbledon run would endure far longer than any artifact. Because she had shown the world that champions don't just win matches. They carry their countries with them. They honor their roots. And they prove that the future of tennis belongs to everyone. The future King of England stepped out of the royal box, walked past the security cordon, and made his way toward the players' tunnel. The cameras followed every step. The crowd fell silent. And when he emerged moments later, he was holding something that would make Wimbledon history. Prince William had watched Alex Eala's historic run from the royal box. He had seen her dismantle opponents, break records, and capture the hearts of millions. He had witnessed the sea of Filipino flags and the deafening roar of a nation finding its voice on the world's biggest stage. And he had decided that this was a moment that deserved recognition. Not with a handshake, not with a photograph, but with something far more personal. When the Prince of Wales made his way to the players' lounge, he carried with him an offer that would leave the Filipina sensation absolutely speechless. An offer to acquire her Wimbledon racket, the very racket that had just carried her into the third round of the most prestigious tournament in tennis for the Royal Collection, a place among the artifacts of the sport's greatest legends. Eala's response was one of stunned gratitude. "I'm honored," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never imagined that my racket would one day be part of something like this." The news spread like wildfire. Filipino fans erupted in celebration. The tennis establishment was stunned. And Alex Eala's historic run had taken on an entirely new dimension. The racket would soon be on its way to the royal collection, a symbol of a 21-year-old's dream that had become a reality. But the significance of this moment extended far beyond the racket itself. It was about what Eala represented. A young woman from a country with no history of Grand Slam success, who had climbed to the top of her sport through sheer determination and grit. A woman who had never forgotten where she came from. A woman who had reminded the world that greatness doesn't have a passport. The royal collection had just added a piece of Philippine tennis history. And Alex Eala had just proven that champions don't just win matches, they carry their countries with them, they honor their roots, and they show the next generation that they too can dream. Was this the ultimate recognition of Alex Eala's historic run? Or just the beginning of something even more extraordinary?